Good to see you. Welcome to Gather and Grow. It's good to be together and to have the chance to pause in the midst of this day. Oops, lost me. There we go. Okay. I guess he didn't like that last part, so we cut that out. So I look forward to that day when I can run the soundboard and just have all that control. We are grateful for this opportunity that we take in the middle of a Sunday where we worship and to sort of echo Lori's sermon, to find those times when we can pause and reflect and contemplate about who we are and whose we are in our relationship with Christ, and what does it mean for us to grow, gather and grow into a deeper relationship with our Lord. So thank you for taking advantage of this time, and we hope that looks like the sun is coming out. Oh, so nice, very nice. I'm afraid to tell you that because you may go out and enjoy it. So without further ado, let me pray for us. Lord, thank you for this day. We're grateful that we can be gathered together and to reflect upon your word and to reflect upon your way in the world and your way in us. And we ask, oh God, that with our open ears and open minds and open hearts, that your Spirit may speak to us and that we may discover more of what you are calling us to be. For we ask this in Christ's name. Amen. So a while ago, we got thinking about different things we wanted to talk about over the different segments of our Gather and Grow sessions, and we decided at the beginning of February, especially keeping in mind that this is our generosity season, that we would focus at least the first week of February on the topic of generosity. And I got the assignment to talk about generosity. And so I got to thinking a little bit about that and what kind of approach we might take with generosity, knowing that when the pastor starts talking about generosity and stewardship, that's when people grab their wallets. Not to take them out. They grab their wallets to protect them because, here comes the preacher and all he wants is my money. So I got thinking about that and wondered, well, maybe generosity is not the best way to lead with this topic of wondering about our generosity lives. And so I got thinking about another topic, which is the one that we've been billing over the last couple of weeks. And that is the topic, becoming the person your dog thinks you are. And now I have to first of all say that I stole that. You perhaps have heard that phrase before, and it's actually the title of a book by Jim Davies, Being the Person Your Dog Thinks You Are. And it's a really interesting book, and I invite you to take a look at it sometime. It's not a Christian book, not a religious book per se. It's actually a book around cognitive science and kind of how our brain works and what kinds of things we might do in order to kind of retrain ourselves, perhaps to being the person that your dog thinks you are. Now, I'm changing that title from being to becoming. Because I think when we talk about generosity, when we talk about trying to reach the goal or aspire to being a particular kind of person, it's always a matter of becoming. I think one of the challenges that we have in our life, and especially our spiritual life, is we look out ahead and we see models of people that we want to be. And we also then quickly see a gap between who we are and what that model is. We get these wonderful examples I'll throw an illustration or two in a sermon of mine, and you'll go, oh, wow, wouldn't it be nice to be that kind of person? But then you begin to think, well, that person is so different than me. Maybe the distance between me and that person is just so large. Why even start thinking about it? Why even start working in that direction? Because it's just a bridge too far, and it would be a challenge for us, a challenge for any of us, in order to get to that point. So I focus on the word becoming because I want to think with you a little bit about what does it mean to become more and more the person, not only that our dog thinks we are, but also the kind of person that we believe God hopes us to be. How many of you have ever owned a dog? Okay, wow, we got a dog owning group here. That's probably the only reason you came is because you owned a dog and you like dogs. So nobody's not owned a dog and or perhaps doesn't like dogs, may not even be here. Maybe I should offer a class, Becoming the Person Your Cat Thinks You Are, and we get a whole other group of people. But becoming the person your dog thinks you are, dogs have this amazing ability to kind of surrender themselves to us, right? And they are just always so grateful for everything that we do for them, at least the dogs I've had several dogs. And it's just wonderful to be greeted by a dog who comes, because the dog sort of shows this expectation that you're going to be just the greatest thing since sliced bread. Now, the fact of the matter is, we do a lot for our dogs, right? We feed them, we take them out for walks, we pick up their little doo-doo, and we pet them, right? So there's a lot we give to our dogs, but there's a lot that our dogs give back to us. And so I love that title because in some sense, we probably aren't the people that our dogs think we are, because we're more than just our relationship with our dogs. We live out in the world, and the world becomes a bit more challenging when it comes to being the people that we want to be. Why? Because the world gives us a lot of pushback, right? Our dogs don't give us a whole lot of pushback. A little bit here and there, especially when they bark at strangers in the middle of the night and that kind of thing. But our dogs don't give us much pushback, but the world gives us pushback. The world wants to form us into the people that the world thinks best fit into the world. And so it's challenging for us to wonder about what does it mean for us to be something different. So in this journey of becoming, I think of two characters that perhaps are familiar. One is very familiar to all of you, and the other one perhaps is not as familiar. The first one is a guy named Ebenezer Scrooge. Now, there's an example of a story of somebody who was one extreme, right? Ebenezer Scrooge, he was a Scrooge. He was selfish. He didn't care to really help anybody. His generosity was non-existent, to all the way to the end of the story where Scrooge has a complete transformation. In fact, the story of A Christmas Carol, the story of Scrooge, ends this way. Scrooge was better than his word. This is after he'd had his waking up in the morning and having had his visits by the three spirits. He did it all and infinitely more, and to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, and little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset. And knowing that such as these would be blind anyway, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle up their eyes in grins as have the malady in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with the spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterward, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. And may that truly be said of us and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, every one. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. And I wonder if that will be something for us to keep in mind when we think about this, becoming this person that not only that God wishes us to be, but also that our dog thinks we are, of being somebody who has this sense of laughter within himself, this sense of joy of experiencing the abundant life that Jesus Christ has called us to. The other character that I have in mind is a character in one of my all-time favorite movies. It's really kind of rising up the ranks because I watched it again at Christmas time. And I said to my wife Amanda, I said, it's getting to the top, getting to the very top. And it's not, it's a Wonderful Life. It is the movie Little Women. The 1990s version, not the most recent version. And in that movie, the book is a little different, treats this character a little bit different, but Mr. Lawrence is the next door neighbor of the March sisters and Mrs. March, Marmee as they called her. And he from a distance observes this family that had once been a fairly prosperous family, but had fallen on hard times. And so they really had barely had 2 nickels to rub together. On top of that, their father, the husband-father, had left to go to be a chaplain in the Civil War. And so Mr. Lawrence kind of holds this family a little bit at a distance and kind of watches them as they struggle until little Beth March gets scarlet fever and gets to a point of near death. And that's the point at which his heart begins to warm and begins to change. And we kind of watch him develop from this sort of hardened, distant, arm's length person to this man who begins to have a very different approach to life. So I want to show you this little clip. Beth has been recovering from scarlet fever, and she has been up in bed for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And Mr. Lawrence intercedes with his physician for a brief moment, and then finding when she's just well enough to come down for Christmas, this is what happens. So could we show the video? All right. And maybe you've had to watch the movie 100 times like I have in order to feel Mr. Lawrence's evolution from being very insular and very protective of all that he had to getting to the point where he began to see life outside of himself, especially understanding the plight of those who were his neighbors. So when we begin with this whole topic of becoming this person who evolves, there's one way to evolve, and that is to be visited by 3 spirits in the middle of the night and have this sort of nightmarish experience from which we wake up and we become a totally different person. There's another way to evolve is to really kind of see and grow warm over one who is close at hand, one who perhaps resonates with us for whatever reason, and that personal experience and begins to warm our heart, and we become somebody different as a result of that experience. But I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what does it mean for us to take that journey ourselves without the expectation that we're going to be visited by spirits, without waiting for something to happen to us in order for that to somehow transform our lives, because that's seldom the case, right? We begin to take on the likeness of Christ often through our own intentional journey of seeking to understand ourselves as well as seeking to understand who Christ is, so that we can, in a very intentional way, take this journey from who we are now to what we seek to be in the person of Jesus Christ. So it's important to begin that journey with where we are, so that we have a true sense of where we begin. One of the things that I think maybe most of us want to think of ourselves is as being generous people. I never had anybody approach me and tell me that they are not generous, or that they take great delight in the fact that, I'm just not a very generous person. I think to some degree we all want to believe about ourselves that we are generous people, but we're never quite sure exactly what that means. What does it really mean to be a generous person? And is it true that we may not be as generous as we think we are? This is the point at which people get up and start leaving, because I'm suggesting something perhaps different than what you may think of yourself. And I think that's one of the reasons why Jesus shares this parable with us from Matthew chapter 18. It's a little bit of a long parable, but I think it says something about this transformation that it lies before us as an opportunity. And it begins with these verses. Peter came and said to Jesus, "Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times?" And Jesus says, "Oh, no, Peter, not 7 times, but 70 times 7, or 77 times. So the whole story starts out with Peter thinking, he's got the right answer. Do I give 7 times? Do I forgive 7 times? And Jesus says, "Oh, no, you're starting kind of where you are. But let me share with you about where you need to be 77 times. And then he goes on to tell this parable. "For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. And when he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. And as he could not pay, his lord ordered him to be sold together with his wife and children and all his possessions, and payment to be made. So the slave fell on his knees before him, saying, 'Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything.' And out of pity for him, the lord of that slave released him and forgave him the debt. But that same slave, as he went out, came upon one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii, and seizing him by the throat, he said, 'Pay what you owe.' And then his fellow slave fell down and pleaded with him, 'Have patience with me, and I will pay you.' But he refused and went and threw him into prison until he would pay the debt. When his fellow slaves saw what had happened, and they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their lord all that had taken place. Then his lord summoned him and said to him, 'You wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow slave as I had mercy on you?' And in anger his lord handed him over to be tortured until he would pay his entire debt." So why does Jesus tell us that parable? Does he tell us that parable because it's about somebody else and not you? That's one of the great things about Jesus' parables, is they kind of lead us, put us on this precipice where we have to ask the question, is he talking about somebody else, or is he talking about me? I love the people that come out of church every once in a while and say, "Great sermon, Pastor. I just wish my husband was here to hear it." Right? So Jesus tells us parables, oftentimes getting us to think that maybe it's got to be about somebody else. Maybe it's really about Peter he's telling this parable about. But the truth of the matter is, with every parable that Jesus shares with us, he's inviting us into it and asking us to wonder, are we the 7 times person? Or are we the 77 times person? Are we here and yet are invited to be on the journey of becoming? Now, I'm not sharing that parable, nor do I lead with this to get you, feeling bad about yourself or feeling guilty about yourself. More so, I'm here to share with you the opportunity and the invitation for us to continue to grow in our understanding of ourselves and in our understanding of what God is calling us to be and to do. Why? Because, as Brother Scrooge says, why? So our own hearts will laugh. At the end of the day, the life that we're being called into is an abundant life. It's a life where our hearts will laugh. And a big part of that, I believe, is the life of generosity, the life of being a person that Christ has called us to be. In this book being the person that your dog thinks you are, he cites a couple of studies that were done by two sociologists named Daniel Batson, just one sociologist named Daniel Batson, and he talks about this exercise where random people were brought forward to do a test, and the test was this: that there was a gift that was, and they named the gift a certain amount of money, that was being made available. And the decision each person had to make was, would they keep the gift or would they give the gift to an anonymous person? So it's a free gift. Is it a gift you keep or is it a gift you give? And they did, the control in the study was that there had been a certain amount of people that had scored very high on a previous test that had been given in terms of charitability. So there was the group that was inclined toward charitability, and there was the group that didn't really score high on that test. And so these two groups were brought in, and each individual was asked the question, would you keep the gift or would you give it away? And they were also given the option to flip a coin to decide. Now, as it turned out, most of the charitable people picked the coin to flip. And the folks that didn't score high in charitability didn't pick the coin. And so they proceeded with the test, and here's what happened. 90% of all the people who flipped the coin kept the gift, even though the coin had been flipped for the person to give away to, including the charitable group. So those who were charitable, when they decided to flip the coin, when the coin came up heads, which meant give it away, they just changed the result and kept it for themselves. Now, why do I share that test with you? Well, I think it provides us an opportunity to ask ourselves the question, how charitable how charitable am I really? And I'm not here to set that score for you. I'm not here to tell you got to be at a certain point, or you got to give away a certain amount of money, or you got to give away your time, or you have to forgive. Well, Jesus says you got to forgive 70 times 7, so you better listen to that. But I'm here to invite you to wonder about how do you feel and how generous are you in terms of your giving to the world. And I think that the challenge that we all face in our life and in our society is that we are met with all sorts of forces that are here to convince us not to be as generous as perhaps we would like to be. And we could list 1,000 different of those forces. I'll share with you one story that I had, and I've shared this before, I think in Bible studies from time to time. And that was when, early on, when I was in ministry, I was maybe 5 years into ministry. And, we were just scraping, nickels together, trying to, keep ahead of the bills. And a friend of mine came up to me and says, listen, I would love for you to get some financial sense. And he said, I have arranged and paid for a financial advisor for you to sit down with so he can kind of plot out your course in terms of your finances. And I said, great. And so Amanda and I went, and we kind of laid out all our finances. And at the end of the day, after we looked at it all, he said, well, my first piece of advice to you is to stop giving your money away. Now, he knew I was a pastor, right? He knew who I was. He knew that, that was a big part of my life. But he said, I just have to tell you, it doesn't make any sense for you to give as much money away as you're giving. And when we were driving home, I said to Amanda, I said, that's interesting that would be advice this financial advisor would give to a pastor. Now, just think of the typical 30-year-old that would sit down in front of a person like this, or in front of 1,000 different other kinds of advisors, who would hear that same message and are to be told that to be generous, it doesn't make any sense. And in a very real sense, it doesn't make any sense if you're taking a look at it from a very, very particular perspective. But when you are beginning to wonder about entering into the kingdom of heaven, you begin to see life a little differently, and you become aware of what it is that's going on inside of you and what it is that is competing within you to consider a different kind of life when it comes to the life of generosity. I had a mentor of mine said that whenever you invite people to give, if you tell them to give a certain amount of money, you say, well, it would be really great if everybody would chip in $50 apiece in order for us to do this. He would tell me that often a minimum becomes a maximum. And that indicates a little bit about how we view generosity. If I ask you to give $50, the first thought you have in mind is, well, that's all you want, and that's all I'm going to give, rather as opposed to considering what is it that I can do in the face of whatever the need might be, including our overall world in which we live. The challenges that we all face as human beings when it comes to considering generosity are the priorities that we place around our lives. And when you think about it, we could come up with a list of 100 things to consider about the kinds of priorities that typical adults consider when they are looking at their generosity life. And those priorities often include, how secure am I? How entertained am I? How high am I in my status in the world? And how healthy am I? Now, again, there could be a whole other list that we could include in that list. But when we think about the life of generosity, it's important for us to pause and ask ourselves, what are the priorities that I have in my life? And to what degree do those priorities get in the way of my life of generosity? To what degree do I get myself into a position where I am laughing inside my own heart? You know, when I don't know about you, but when I get fixated on how secure I am, when I get fixated on sort of where my status is, when I get fixated on my health, when I get fixated on how much is in my 401b, and even to a degree when I get sort of, transfixed by the television news, or when I get transfixed by, the latest thing on Netflix. Those are seldom areas in my life in which I am laughing in my heart. But I will say to you that that when I participate in the world of generosity, when I am led, and believe me, I am not the model of generosity, but in those moments when I am led to give out of my own resources to the world, or to an individual, or to my church, that's the closest I get to laughing in my heart. And I think that's in part what Jesus was intending us to think about when it comes to living the abundant life. In this day and age, our abundant life, that financial advisor, when he was talking about the abundant life, he was talking about a really, really big 401k. He was really talking about, all the kinds of resources that I might need in order to do what I want to do. And he translated that perhaps into laughing in your heart. But Jesus has a very different understanding of what it means to laugh in our hearts. And it has a lot to do with how we are using that which God has given us in order to share with the world. So when I say about beginning where one is, And this is going to be a little bit of homework that I'm going to assign to you because I have to finish up here in 3 minutes so I can get over and do the call to worship as the next service. I want you on your own, if you're here on your own, or I want you, if you're a couple, to go home and ask yourself this question. Do I feel as if my generosity life is where I wish it to be? Do I feel as if my generosity life is where I wish it to be? Am I at a 7 times place, or am I at a 77 times place? And, Lori, in her sermon, was great to encourage us to take time to be alone with God and to have a conversation with God about where are we in this continuum of generosity. And I'm not here to give you where that goal needs to be. The Old Testament says we should tithe, give 10% of our proceeds to the life of the church. Jesus hailed the woman who gave her last 2 pennies to the temple. I'm not here to tell you exactly precisely what the goal of generosity should be, because you can be generous even beyond the church. And my generosity extends beyond the church to some other people and institutions that are very important to me. But at the same time, when you look at what you have and you look at what you're giving, have the honest conversation with yourself to ask, is this an opportunity for me to grow? Is this an opportunity for me to grow? And do I really believe that the result of my growing in this journey, do I really believe that the ultimate reality will be laughing in my heart? Next week, kind of establishing the sort of baseline, next week we're going to talk about intentional ways by which people can take that journey of growing from where they are to where they believe God wishes them to be, along with their dog. So that this doesn't just become sort of a general, nudge, but more an invitation for you to think very specifically about how you can continue on that journey to reach that goal that you might have in front of you, to be the person that Christ has called you to be, and ultimately to be one who has much laughter in one's heart. So that's where I'm leaving you, and I promise you very specific ideas and thoughts around how you can take that journey, but it begins with where we are, and that's what I invite you to do, and I won't be asking for answers next week. This is all very personal stuff, but I will be inviting you to bring that consideration with you when we meet next time. All right? Peace.